A powerful CEO in a red dress was about to lose the company she spent 11 years building, and the man she trusted most helped destroy her. Alone in a frozen lake house, she met a quiet craftsman who repaired broken docks for a living after losing his wife years earlier. But when a leaked recording nearly ruined her life, one sentence from him changed everything. "Don't leave just because someone convinced you you're no longer worth staying for." This emotional story will break your heart and slowly heal it. Before we begin, share where you're watching from. And if this story stirs something in you, subscribe for more stories of honor, sacrifice. Your support truly means the world. Snow drifted across Ashbury Lake in slow white sheets, while the black water beneath the frozen docks moved almost silently under the ice. Sophia Bennett stood alone behind the glass wall of her lakeside house, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The reflection staring back at her looked composed in the expensive way magazines like to photograph successful women. Sharp jawline, dark auburn hair falling in loose waves over one shoulder, long legs under a fitted crimson silk dress that looked more suited for a Manhattan rooftop dinner than a Colorado winter morning. At 34, Sophia had built Bennett Atelier into one of the fastest-growing luxury furniture brands in Chicago, and she had done it with the kind of discipline that slowly erased softness from a person. People online called her elegant, untouchable, brilliant. People who worked for her called her exhausting when she wasn't in the room. The truth was simpler. Sophia had spent 11 years becoming someone nobody could dismiss again. Her phone buzzed across the marble kitchen island. Another message from the board. She didn't read it immediately. Outside, half the wooden dock behind the house leaned sideways into the lake, where last night's storm had ripped through the shoreline. Snow still clung to the broken posts. One section had collapsed completely into the dark water below. Sophia stared at it for a long moment before finally opening the text. "We need to discuss restructuring options before Q1 numbers go public." Restructuring. That word again. It appeared in emails now the way smoke appeared before people admitted something was burning. Sophia locked the phone and tossed it aside harder than she meant to. The sound cracked sharply across the silent kitchen. "Jesus," she muttered under her breath. A low bark answered from near the fireplace. The dog lifted his head lazily from the rug. Walter was an old golden retriever with cloudy eyes and white fur spreading around his muzzle like frost. He belonged to the previous owner of the house, an elderly architect who had died 6 months earlier. Sophia had intended to rehome him after buying the property, but the dog had followed her from room to room during her first week there and somehow never left. "You're judging me again?" she asked quietly. Walter thumped his tail once against the floor, then rested his head back down. Sophia exhaled slowly and checked the time. The repairman was late. Not technically late, 2 minutes early according to the scheduled appointment, but Sophia lived by calendars precise enough to divide entire lives into 15-minute sections. Waiting irritated her. At exactly 8:28, headlights appeared through the falling snow. A dark gray pickup truck rolled into the driveway, carrying a layer of dried mud across the sides. Not new, not polished. A working vehicle. Sophia watched a man step out. Tall, broad shoulders under a heavy brown canvas jacket faded by years of weather. Dark hair touched lightly with gray near the temples. Thick beard trimmed short but uneven, like he cut it himself without caring much about symmetry. His face had the rough angles of somebody who spent most of his life outdoors. Hands scarred, slow movements, no wasted energy. Ethan Cole looked like a man who had once been stronger than necessary and never fully relaxed afterward. He stood still for a second, studying the damaged dock before grabbing a toolbox from the truck bed. No rush, no performance. Sophia already disliked him a little for that. Most people hurried around her. He didn't even look toward the house immediately. When he finally did, his expression stayed neutral. Not impressed, not intimidated, just observant. Sophia opened the back door before he reached it. "You're Ethan Cole?" "That's right." His voice was deeper than she expected. Calm, worn around the edges. "You came recommended." "Depends who recommended me." "Property management company in town." He nodded once. "Then they probably mentioned I'm expensive." Sophia crossed her arms. "They mentioned you finished jobs properly." That too. For some reason, the answer annoyed her. Up close, Ethan looked older than 41. Not unhealthy, just weathered, like life had pressed into him instead of sliding off. There was something restrained about him, something careful in the way he held eye contact without lingering too long. Sophia had spent years around ambitious men in tailored suits who spoke too loudly and smiled before they meant it. Ethan felt unfamiliar to her. Not softer, just quieter. "That's the dock," she said, gesturing toward the lake. "Storm damage." Ethan walked past her without another word. Again, that irritated her. She followed him through the snow, heels sinking slightly into the icy path. Ethan crouched near one of the broken support posts and pressed his gloved hand against the wood near the base. Then he reached lower, scraping away frozen slush with a flathead screwdriver. A few seconds passed. "What?" Sophia asked. Ethan stood slowly. "This didn't happen overnight. The storm snapped it." "The storm finished it," he corrected calmly. He pointed toward the base of the post, where the wood underneath had turned dark and soft. "Water got into the foundation a long time ago. Rot spread through the supports." He glanced across the collapsed section. "Probably started years back." Sophia felt irritation rise immediately, sharper than it should have. "I'm not interested in a lecture about maintenance." "I'm not giving one." "Good." Ethan looked at her for a moment, then back at the dock. There was no challenge in his expression, no defensiveness either. Somehow that made it worse. Most people reacted to her sharpness. They apologized, adjusted themselves around it. Ethan simply absorbed it and continued. "I can rebuild the section," he said. "But if the foundation underneath stays weak, you'll have the same problem again next winter." Sophia folded her arms tighter against the cold. "How long?" 3 days if weather holds." "And the cost?" He gave her the number without hesitation. No inflated pause, no negotiation tactics. Sophia studied him carefully. "That's lower than the other estimates. I don't charge people for imaginary problems." "And the real ones?" "I charge for those." Walter wandered slowly outside onto the deck behind them, stopping beside Ethan with stiff old legs. Ethan glanced down and scratched behind the dog's ear automatically without interrupting himself. Walter leaned into his hand immediately. Sophia noticed that. Animals usually hesitated around strangers. "You live out here?" she asked. "About 20 minutes north." "You work alone?" "Mostly." A pause. "My wife used to help with the books," he added casually. "Before she passed." There was no dramatic shift in his tone when he said it. No invitation for sympathy, just fact. Something inside Sophia tightened unexpectedly. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. Ethan nodded once. "Been 5 years." Then silence again. Snow continued falling around them in thick, quiet layers. Somewhere across the frozen lake, tree branches cracked under the weight of ice. Sophia looked back at the damaged dock, then at the dark water underneath it, then at Ethan. "You can start tomorrow," she said. Ethan studied the broken foundation one more time before answering. "No," he said quietly. "I should start today." By the second morning, the snow had stopped falling, but the cold stayed sharp enough to crack thin ice along the edge of the lake. Sophia Bennett woke at 4:12 a.m. without needing an alarm. She had slept barely 3 hours. The house was silent, except for the low mechanical hum of the heating system and the occasional shift of old wood somewhere deep in the walls. For a few seconds, she stared at the ceiling, trying to remember where she was. Chicago had trained her body to wake already braced for impact. Emails, investor calls, damage control. Her nervous system no longer understood the difference between urgency and normal life. She sat up slowly and rubbed both hands over her face. The crimson dress from yesterday still hung over the chair near the bedroom window. Wrinkled now. Less powerful somehow. Sophia walked downstairs barefoot, wrapped in a cream-colored cashmere robe that cost more than Ethan's truck probably did. The kitchen lights reflected off the glass walls overlooking the lake. The broken dock remained out there in the dark, like a sentence left unfinished. Her phone already held 14 unread messages, 3 from the board, 5 from finance, 2 from journalists requesting comments regarding internal restructuring rumors, and 4 from Daniel Reeves. Sophia stared at his name longer than she intended. Daniel had once been the kind of man people noticed the second he entered a room. Tall, athletic, dark blonde hair always styled perfectly, expensive watches visible just enough to be intentional. He had joined Bennett Atelier 7 years earlier as a financial strategist and learned quickly how to become indispensable. Smart, charming, ambitious in the polished corporate way that made ambition sound respectable. Sophia used to mistake that for loyalty. They had dated for almost 3 years before she realized Daniel only loved things that were rising. The moment the company began struggling, his warmth turned procedural. Now every message from him sounded like legal language wearing human skin. "We need to discuss optics before next week's board review. Please don't make emotional decisions right now. Investors are nervous." Sophia locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the counter. Outside, headlights appeared again through the trees. Ethan. Exactly 6:28 a.m. She hated that she noticed. From the kitchen window, she watched him climb out of the truck carrying lumber over one shoulder. Same brown jacket, same slow movements. No performance. No urgency meant to impress anyone. A large black dog jumped down after him from the passenger side. The animal was enormous, mostly Labrador mixed with something heavier, old enough that gray spread around his muzzle. One ear bent slightly from an old injury. He moved stiffly, but stayed close beside Ethan without needing commands. Sophia stepped outside onto the back deck just as Ethan reached the dock. "You brought a dog." Ethan glanced back briefly. "This is Murphy." Murphy looked up once at Sophia with tired amber eyes, then ignored her completely. "He goes where I go," Ethan added. "Does he bite?" "Only people who deserve it." Sophia almost smiled before catching herself. Ethan set his toolbox down and immediately began removing damaged boards from the collapsed section. Efficient, precise, every movement economical. Sophia leaned against the railing, watching him longer than necessary. "You always start this early?" "Wood behaves better in the cold morning." "That sounds made up." "It isn't." She crossed her arms against the wind. "Do you ever explain anything fully?" "Usually only if someone's paying double." Again, that almost smile threatened to happen. Sophia hated how unfamiliar it felt. By noon, Ethan had rebuilt half the support frame beneath the dock. He worked mostly in silence while Murphy slept nearby on the snow-covered deck, occasionally lifting his head whenever Ethan moved farther away. Sophia spent the morning on video calls inside the house. She wore another red dress for the meetings because people expected consistency from powerful women. Red meant confidence, control, strength. Meanwhile, her company was quietly bleeding from the inside. At 1:17 p.m., the board meeting turned ugly. Marcus Holloway, one of the senior board members, finally said aloud what everyone else had been circling around for weeks. Marcus was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the smooth, tanned face of a man who spent money trying to outrun age. He had mentored Sophia early in her career, then slowly grown resentful once she stopped needing guidance. Men like Marcus loved ambitious women, right up until those women became harder to control. "We need stable leadership moving into next quarter," he said calmly through the screen. Sophia stared at him. "You mean leadership that agrees with you?" "I mean leadership investors trust." Daniel avoided eye contact during the meeting. That hurt more than Marcus speaking. By the time the call ended, Sophia felt hollowed out. She walked outside without her coat, needing cold air hard enough to interrupt her thoughts. Ethan was kneeling near the dock foundation, sleeves rolled halfway up despite the temperature. His forearms were rough with old scars and sun-darkened skin. Not gym strength, working strength. Sophia stood there for a long moment before speaking. "They're trying to push me out." Ethan kept tightening a bolt. "I figured." "You figured?" "He looked like someone sleeping beside a fire alarm." She laughed once under her breath. Bitter. "That obvious?" "To somebody paying attention." Sophia sat carefully on the edge of the deck stairs. Walter slowly wandered outside and settled beside her legs while Murphy watched from under the dock. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then suddenly, the words started coming. Not elegantly, not controlled. She told Ethan about the board, about investors, about Daniel quietly siding against her after years of promising they were building something together. She admitted she no longer knew who around her actually cared whether she stayed or disappeared. Ethan listened without interruption. No fake sympathy, no motivational speeches, just attention. That somehow made her keep talking. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked finally, staring at the frozen lake. "I can't even tell when people stop loving something anymore. They just become strategic." Ethan wiped his hands slowly with a rag before answering. "People usually leave long before they officially go." Sophia looked at him sharply. The sentence landed too cleanly, because she knew he wasn't only talking about Daniel, or the board, or the company. He was talking about her, too. About the years she spent abandoning herself in tiny professional pieces, until there was barely anything left except competence. The wind moved across the lake in a long, cold breath. Ethan stood again and returned to work. No dramatic moment, no attempt to comfort her. And for reasons Sophia could not fully explain, that hurt worse than pity. That night she sat alone beside the glass wall after midnight, while snow drifted lightly over the dark water again. Walter slept beside the couch. The house smelled faintly of cedar from the fresh lumber Ethan had cut earlier. Sophia held a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Then, without warning, she started crying. Not loudly, not beautifully, the kind of exhausted crying that seemed to come from someplace older than the actual problem. And somewhere deep underneath the humiliation of it was one terrifying realization. Ethan Cole was the first person in years who had spoken to her without wanting something in return. The lake thawed slightly by the third week, enough for dark water to appear in thin, restless cracks beneath the ice. Sophia Bennett stopped taking sleeping pills on a Wednesday without telling anyone. Not because life had improved, nothing had improved. Bennett Atelier was still under pressure. Investors were still nervous. The board was still circling her company like men discussing how to divide land before the owner officially died. But something in her body had begun slowing down. She started waking up before sunrise and making coffee instead of opening emails immediately. She ate breakfast sitting down now, which used to feel impossible to her. Sometimes she watched Ethan work from the kitchen window without realizing 20 minutes had passed. It embarrassed her a little. The old version of Sophia would have called this dangerous. Attachment was dangerous. Dependence was worse. Still, every morning around 6:30, Ethan's truck appeared through the trees, and some tight, invisible wire inside her chest loosened before she could stop it. That frightened her more than the board did. Ethan finished rebuilding the main dock supports and spent the next few days restoring smaller details most contractors would have ignored. Railings, water sealant, bent hardware beneath the platform nobody would ever notice unless it failed later. Sophia sat in his workshop for the first time on Friday afternoon. The workshop stood 20 yards from the lake house near the tree line, a narrow cedar building carrying the permanent smell of sawdust, machine oil, and cold winter air. Old records played softly from a dusty radio near the workbench. Nothing modern, mostly blues and older country music that sounded worn in around the edges. Ethan looked up briefly when she entered. "You lost?" Sophia glanced around the room. "I was curious." "That usually ends badly." The corner of her mouth moved slightly. "You always this welcoming?" "Only to billionaires in red dresses." Sophia looked down at herself automatically. Another red dress. Dark crimson this time, with long sleeves and the high collar. Softer than her usual corporate armor, but still expensive enough to separate her from the world around her. She leaned against the doorway while Ethan sanded the edge of a wooden tabletop with slow, steady movements. The workshop matched him somehow. Nothing decorative. Everything functional. Old tools repaired instead of replaced. Coffee stains on the workbench. A faded baseball cap hanging from a nail beside the door. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. "Most of it." "Why stay out here?" Ethan shrugged once. "Quiet." "That's it?" Usually enough. Sophia watched his hands working across the wood. Scarred knuckles, thick fingers roughened by years of labor. No wedding ring anymore, though she noticed the pale line where one used to sit. What was her name? She asked carefully. Ethan didn't pretend not to understand. Claire. The way he said it changed the air slightly. Claire Cole still existed somewhere inside him. She was loud, Ethan added after a moment, which surprised people because she looked calm. Sophia sat down slowly on a stool nearby. What did she look like? Ethan paused the sanding machine for the first time in several minutes. He leaned back slightly against the table, as if reaching into memory physically hurt sometimes. Short brown hair, freckles everywhere in summer. A faint smile appeared briefly beneath the beard. She laughed at serious things and took stupid things personally. Sophia listened quietly. She taught music at the elementary school in town. Ethan continued. Everybody liked her immediately, which annoyed me because it took people years to like me. What happened? Heart condition. His voice stayed level. Collapsed in a grocery store one afternoon. Sophia felt her stomach tighten. How old were you? 36. And after? Ethan picked up the sanding block again. After that, I spent a long time learning how to exist without expecting anything from life. No self-pity. No dramatic pause. That almost made it worse. Sophia looked around the workshop again and suddenly understood why everything here felt controlled, measured, quiet. This was a man who rebuilt his life carefully because once before it had collapsed without warning. Murphy slept beside the wood stove nearby, while Walter wandered in circles sniffing tools before settling beside him. The two old dogs had started behaving like reluctant roommates. Sophia smiled faintly watching them. You know what bothers me about you? She said suddenly. Ethan glanced up. You never try to impress me. That sounds like a complaint rich people invent. I'm serious. So am I. Silence settled comfortably between them after that. No flirting, no performance, just two exhausted adults sitting in the same room without pretending to be less tired than they actually were. And somehow, that intimacy felt more dangerous than attraction. 3 days later, the crisis hit. Sophia was midway through a conference call when her assistant called privately 3 times in under a minute. That never happened. She answered immediately. Anna? Anna Morales sounded panicked. You need to get online, now! Anna had worked with Sophia for 6 years. Early 30s, Cuban American, sharp cheekbones, dark curls usually tied into a severe bun during work hours. Loyal almost to a fault because Sophia had once paid for her mother's surgery quietly without telling anyone. What happened? There's a recording. Sophia went cold instantly. 10 minutes later, the clip was everywhere online. A leaked internal audio recording from 6 months earlier. Sophia arguing aggressively during a private executive meeting about cutting one of the company's manufacturing divisions. Out of context, edited carefully, her voice sounded ruthless, detached, arrogant. By market close, Bennett Atelier stock had dropped 12%. The board scheduled an emergency meeting that night. Marcus Holloway barely waited 5 minutes before speaking. The public response is catastrophic, he said smoothly. The responsible thing would be temporary leadership transition until confidence stabilizes. Temporary. Another corporate word meaning permanent once people got comfortable enough. Daniel finally spoke near the end. His face looked exhausted now, older somehow. I think stepping down briefly may protect what you built, he said carefully. Sophia stared at him through the screen. You mean protect what's left after you take it? Daniel looked away first. By the time the meeting ended, Sophia felt physically sick. Snow fell heavily again outside as she sat alone at the kitchen counter, staring at the resignation letter on her laptop screen. She typed her name once, stopped, deleted it, typed it again. Walter lifted his head from the rug when the back door opened. Ethan stepped inside quietly, carrying his gloves in one hand. I saw the news, he said. Sophia laughed bitterly without looking up. Congratulations! You officially know a public relations disaster. Ethan walked closer slowly. What's that? My resignation. He read enough of the screen to understand. Sophia rubbed both hands over her face. Maybe they're right. Maybe I've been forcing something that's already over. Ethan stayed silent for several seconds. Then finally, if you want to leave, leave. Sophia looked up sharply. But make sure it's your decision, he continued, not theirs. Don't hand your life over to people who benefit from convincing you that your value disappeared. Something inside her cracked at the sentence. Not dramatically, quietly. The way ice breaks beneath dark water. Sophia looked back at the screen, then slowly closed the laptop. A moment later, she tore the printed resignation letter cleanly in half. Ethan said nothing. He just stayed there. And somehow that mattered more than anything else. The snow finally stopped for almost an entire week, and Ashbury Lake looked strangely exposed without weather covering everything. Sophia Bennett spent Monday morning at the long dining table facing 3 laptops, 2 legal folders, and a yellow notebook filled with names written in black ink. She had changed out of the red dresses for the first time in months. Gray sweater, hair tied back carelessly, bare face except for tired eyes, and determination returning in slow pieces. Ethan noticed immediately when he walked in carrying coffee. You look different, he said. Sophia didn't look up from the paperwork. I look exhausted. That too. He placed the coffee beside her hand. Not close enough to interrupt her work, just within reach. That small instinctive consideration bothered her more than grand romantic gestures ever could. She had spent years around men who performed affection loudly because they wanted credit for it. Ethan did things quietly enough that half the time she noticed them only afterward. Sophia flipped another page in the notebook. These are the original investors, she said, before private equity groups came in. How many? 7 still own voting shares. And they trust you? She hesitated. They used to. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, listening while Murphy and Walter slept near the fireplace, like 2 retired old men avoiding responsibility. Sophia tapped her pen against the notebook slowly. The board thinks I built a luxury brand. They're wrong. She looked up finally. I built a company people stayed at. Ethan nodded once. That matters more. Not to Wall Street. No, he agreed. But Wall Street doesn't build kitchens people eat dinner in either. Sophia stared at him for a second. That was the frustrating thing about Ethan. He kept saying simple things that somehow cut directly through years of corporate noise. Later that afternoon, she began making calls. Not emotional speeches, not desperate pleas. Facts. Revenue growth, employee retention, expansion forecasts, contracts the board planned to cut because they produced slower profit margins, despite stabilizing the company long term. By the 3rd call, her voice changed. Steadier, less wounded. She stopped sounding like someone defending herself and started sounding like the woman who built Bennett Atelier in the first place. Ethan worked outside repairing the final section of railing, while hearing fragments of her conversations through the open kitchen window. This company survived because we didn't treat people like disposable parts. That division isn't inefficient. It's loyal. You invested in my vision once. I'm asking whether you still recognize it. By evening, 2 former shareholders agreed to privately support her against the board vote. Sophia closed her laptop slowly after the last call ended. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel hunted, just tired. Ethan came inside, carrying sawdust across the shoulders of his jacket. The cold had reddened the skin around his eyes slightly. How'd it go? 2 yeses. Sophia rubbed the bridge of her nose. 3 maybes. Better than yesterday. Yesterday I almost resigned. That was yesterday. She looked at him quietly then. There were moments now when silence between them no longer felt empty, just unfinished. That frightened her in ways she couldn't fully explain. Ethan moved toward the sink, washing dust from his hands. Sophia watched the muscles shift beneath his forearms, while water ran over old scars near his wrist. Where'd that one come from? She asked suddenly. Ethan glanced down. Chainsaw accident. 15 years ago. You almost lose the hand? Almost lost more than that. Sophia waited. Claire was pregnant at the time, he said. I got careless trying to finish a job too fast. He dried his hand slowly with a towel. After that, she made me promise I'd stop treating myself like something replaceable. Sophia looked away first, because she knew exactly what it meant to live like your own damage was acceptable collateral. That night, after dinner, Ethan's phone rang while they sat in the living room. He checked the screen, and his entire posture shifted subtly before answering. Sophia noticed immediately. Hey, kid. His voice softened in a way she had never heard before. Ava Cole spoke loudly enough through the phone that Sophia caught pieces of it accidentally. Ethan's daughter sounded energetic, fast-talking, emotionally open in the way people often become when raised by quieter parents. 24 years old, living in Denver, marketing consultant, engaged. Sophia had seen a photograph once near Ethan's workshop. Ava had her mother's smile and Ethan's eyes. Ethan listened more than he talked during the call. Then came a long silence. Oh, he said finally. Sophia looked up from her wine glass. Ethan stared toward the dark lake beyond the windows while listening carefully. California. The word appeared twice. Then, that soon? Another silence. When the call ended, Ethan sat very still for several seconds with the phone still in his hand. Sophia watched him quietly. She's moving, he said finally. To California? He nodded once. Her fiancé got offered a position in San Diego. And she's happy about it? Yeah. But the way he said yeah sounded nothing like happiness. Sophia understood then. Ethan wasn't afraid of being alone. He already knew how to survive loneliness. What exhausted him was loving people who eventually disappeared into lives that no longer needed him every day. First Claire, now Ava, and one day maybe everyone else too. Without thinking, Sophia stood and walked toward the glass doors overlooking the dock. Ethan followed a minute later, slower. Outside, the repaired dock stretched clean and solid over the dark water, stronger than before. Ethan sat on the edge silently. Sophia sat beside him. Cold wind moved across the lake while Murphy slept near the doorway behind them. For almost a full minute, neither spoke. Then Sophia finally said quietly, I don't need someone to save me. Ethan looked over. I just need somebody who doesn't disappear the second things become difficult. The honesty in her voice surprised both of them. No performance, no polished executive language, just exhaustion. Ethan studied her face carefully in the dim light spilling from the house. The sharpness people feared in Sophia Bennett looked different now up close. Less arrogance, more survival instinct stretched too far for too long. You know what the problem is? He said softly. What? Most people leave long before they physically go. His eyes stayed on hers. So when somebody actually stays, it feels unnatural. Sophia swallowed hard. The wind lifted strands of dark auburn hair across her face. Ethan reached out automatically and brushed them gently behind her ear before realizing what he was doing. Neither moved away. Then slowly, carefully, like a man approaching something fragile he didn't want to damage, Ethan took her hand. Sophia looked down at their fingers together, warm against cold. Simple. No dramatic confession, no promises. And somehow, that made it feel real enough to scare both of them. Chicago was raining the morning of the vote. Not dramatic rain, just the cold gray kind that turned windows into mirrors and made the city feel emotionally exhausted before noon. Sophia Bennett stood alone in the private elevator, rising toward the 38th floor of Bennett Atelier headquarters. Her reflection in the brushed steel walls looked familiar again for the first time in months. The red dress was back. Not the softer sweaters from Colorado, not the stripped-down version of herself Ethan had come to know beside the lake. This dress was sharp, structured. Deep crimson silk fitted perfectly along her waist and shoulders. The same kind of dress magazine covers had turned into part of her identity over the years. But today she wasn't wearing it like armor. That was the difference. When the elevator doors opened, conversations outside immediately lowered in volume. Executives watched her walk through the hallway with the careful expressions people use around someone they are no longer sure they can defeat. Sophia noticed Daniel Reeves standing near the conference room windows before he noticed her. Or maybe he had noticed already and simply didn't know how to approach her anymore. He looked worse than the last time she'd seen him in person. Slimmer, dark circles beneath his eyes. His expensive navy suit hung slightly loose around his shoulders now. Stress had sharpened his features in an unattractive way. Daniel had always been handsome, in the polished corporate sense, but lately he looked like a man sleeping beside decisions he regretted. "You came back," he said quietly when she reached him. Sophia adjusted the cuff of her sleeve. "It's still my company." A flicker of pain crossed his face. Not dramatic, real. "You think I wanted this?" he asked. Sophia finally looked directly at him. "I think you wanted to survive more than you wanted to stay loyal." Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped, because there wasn't a clean defense against that. The boardroom doors opened moments later. Marcus Holloway sat near the far end of the long walnut table, silver hair immaculate as always, confidence arranged carefully across his face. But Sophia noticed the small things now. The extra papers stacked too neatly beside him, the untouched coffee, the way his fingers tapped once against the table before becoming still again. He was nervous. Good. The vote lasted almost 2 hours. Numbers, legal arguments, statements about company direction and shareholder confidence, all the usual corporate language people use to disguise hunger as professionalism. Then Sophia stood. No notes. No slides, just her voice. "When I started Bennett Atelier," she said calmly, "I built furniture for people who wanted homes that lasted longer than trends." Her eyes moved slowly across the room. "Somewhere along the way, this company became more interested in appearing valuable than actually being valuable." Nobody interrupted her. Even Marcus stayed silent. Sophia continued. "You want to remove me because growth slowed during a difficult year. Fine, but before you vote, ask yourselves one question honestly." She rested both hands lightly against the table. "If you take me out of this company today, what exactly are you protecting? The business? Or your ability to sell pieces of it faster?" Silence spread across the room afterward. Heavy silence. The dangerous kind. James Whitmore spoke first. 73 years old, white-haired, thin enough to look fragile until he started talking. One of the original investors. Old school in a way that made younger executives underestimate him repeatedly. He had built manufacturing companies before most people in the room graduated college. "I've heard enough," James said calmly. Then he voted against the board. One by one, 4 others followed. By the time the final numbers appeared on screen, Marcus Holloway looked 20 years older. The motion failed. Sophia remained CEO. Nobody applauded. Corporate victories rarely sounded triumphant in real life. Mostly they sounded expensive. Outside the building, reporters waited behind barricades as executives filtered toward black cars and security teams. Sophia ignored them completely. No interviews, no celebration dinner, no victory speech. She drove out of Chicago alone before sunset. The highway stretched dark and wet beneath her headlights, while the city disappeared slowly behind her in the rearview mirror. Somewhere around Iowa, exhaustion finally hit her hard enough that she had to pull over briefly, beside an empty gas station. She sat inside the car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. Not crying, not relieved, just emptied out. 11 years. 11 years building something enormous. And somehow, the only place she wanted to be afterward was a quiet lake house in Colorado, where a man repaired wood slowly and never asked her to become easier to love. She reached Ashbury Lake just after dawn. The sky was pale blue behind the trees when she turned into the driveway. Ethan stood near the front porch, repairing the exterior light fixture beside the door. Heavy flannel shirt rolled to his forearms. Faded jeans, reading glasses low on his nose while he worked with a screwdriver. Murphy slept nearby in the weak spring sunlight. Ethan looked up when he heard the car. Sophia stepped out slowly. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ethan set the screwdriver down carefully. "You drove through the night," he said. Yeah. You win? Sophia looked at him standing there beside the porch light and suddenly realized how tired she was of winning things that left her feeling empty afterward. I think, she said slowly, I spent a lot of years building something that never actually felt like home. Ethan watched her quietly for several seconds. Then, next time build in the right place. The sentence hit her harder than the board vote had. Sophia walked toward him across the gravel driveway. Walter barked once from inside the house, hearing her voice. Ethan opened the screen door before she reached the porch, like he already knew she was staying. Spring came slowly after that. Snow melted around the lake edges first, then the docks thawed. Then mornings stopped hurting to breathe through. Sophia began splitting her time between Chicago and Colorado, until eventually Chicago became the place she visited for work instead of the place she lived. Ethan reopened the larger woodworking studio he had closed after Claire died. Not because he suddenly healed. People didn't heal like movies pretended they did. But because for the first time in years, he could imagine a future without automatically expecting loss at the end of it. Sometimes Sophia worked late upstairs while Ethan sanded wood downstairs, and old blues records played softly through the house. Sometimes they ate dinner in silence because silence no longer meant distance. Sometimes she fell asleep on the couch with paperwork scattered around her and woke under a blanket Ethan had placed there hours earlier without mentioning it. Nobody made speeches about second chances. Nobody used the phrase starting over. They simply built a life carefully, the same way Ethan rebuilt docks after storms. Slowly. Properly. Making sure the foundation could hold the weight before adding anything else. And for the first time in many years, both of them had somewhere they genuinely wanted to return to when the day was over. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles as sudden answers. Sometimes He sends people who stay when life gets heavy. In a world where everyone is rushing, may this story remind you to hold on to what truly matters. Love, kindness, and the people who make life feel like home. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below. And may God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and healing.